Thanks so much. Thank you guys for having me here. I really appreciate you all coming out. Thanks to Chuck for inviting me to come speak to you today. That was really cool, really quite an honor. I've been doing photography for quite a long time. I started when I was a young teenager. Oh yeah, I'm Jordana, by the way. My name is Jordana Russell, Jordana Dale Russell. I go by Jordana Dale professionally. So all my social media, my website and everything is under Jordana Dale. So yeah, when I was 15, I did a correspondence course through the New York Institute of Photography and gained a certificate of professional photography from there. And then after high school, I took a little bit of time off and did some traveling, and I went to Chicago and studied, did an internship with a celebrity wedding photographer in Chicago. So he had also been working for the Chicago Tribune when he was younger too, and then he became a wedding photographer. So a lot of great experience there. And then after that, I moved up to Athens and got my degree, my bachelor's here at UGA in photography. So yeah, so it's been about 14 years that I've been doing photography, and I started on film. Yeah, since then I've been working at art galleries in Atlanta, and I've been doing freelance work since I graduated, and now I moved back and I work at pixel&ink. So yeah, so I'll talk more about myself later and when I get to my work, but I wanted to kind of talk to you guys today about film photography in today's day and age, and like why someone would choose to shoot film, and some photographers that are still thriving, some photographers who had never stopped shooting film, or photographers that have picked it up, and how it's still like a viable medium. You can still use it professionally in the industry, and then how that's affected the film production industry, Kodak, Fujifilm, and all those companies. And yeah, and then again, I'll talk a little bit more about my own personal journey and why I chose to shoot film. So this is not super easy to read, but yeah, so in 1999, it was the introduction of digital cameras, and as you can see, film camera sales just plummeted. So obviously a huge decline, and when digital came out, it was fast, it was immediate. No, like studio photographers no longer needed, Polaroids to check exposure, and it just really hugely changed the industry. And yeah, so film just started to kind of disappear, and people thought that it was going to be completely obsolete. Why? Why would you choose film now, given the statistics? I had that Fujifilm apparently peaked in 2003 as far as film sales, which is interesting to me. It's like a little bit after digital, but they were selling 960 million rolls, and today they're just around 2% of that. So it's a really big decline. Yeah, so I mean, this isn't necessarily a presentation about like the differences between film and digital, because they're both, they both work, they both, capture images, and that's really all that photography is about. You can do that no matter how you choose. Like, it's not really, I don't want it to be like a debate or whatever, but I do want to tell you that film, is still really great. There's still really good qualities to it, and reasons why people might shoot it. One of those reasons is like the tangible aspect, right? People just kind of wanting to get back to it. Maybe it's like a hipster thing, maybe it's like people just liking vintage things. I thought that this was funny. The two things that really drew me to vinyl were the expense and the inconvenience. So you can definitely relate that to film, because it does seem really expensive and difficult to use. So, but I mean, the music industry is seeing a resurgence in vinyl, and I think those are the similar reasons. So someone posed this question in regards to film on a group that I was a part of, a Facebook group. And so I thought that some of their reasons for choosing film were pretty funny too. I'll just read some of these to you. This one's, maybe I'm burned out with technology. I enjoy the odors and chemicals. Because finding a roll of film stashed in an old shoebox after a move and developing it brings back more memories than an iPhone photo. Maybe that's true, for them it was. These are all direct quotes from people on Facebook. I enjoy it, and it's the only way I can afford a full frame. So I can definitely relate to that. I'll talk more about that. Because I hate taking photos and having people say, let me see. Especially if you're a portrait photographer or wedding photographer. The awkwardness of explaining to people that yes, you can still buy film, and no, this camera doesn't just shoot black and white. If I can touch it, I can trust it. That's another thing about the tangible. It's an irritating, this is my favorite, it's an irritating, thorn in my side, frustrating, expensive way to get images, but I have to do something to avoid housework, and it does the trick. Many reasons that people choose film. So, yeah, so again, going back to like the tangible aspect, and people love the tactile, especially in like this day and age of like screens. Everything, you're looking at your screen, like I'd probably look at my phone over 100 times a day, like it's sad. Plus you work on computers and everything, and so sometimes people want to get away from that and actually deal with something that is like physical. You're touching the negatives, you're putting it in your camera. Even if the end result is still a scan or a digital, you have that tangible negative. And so that goes into my next point about archival aspects. When digital kind of first came out, a lot of people were talking about like the archival nature of digital, right? Backing it up, you have that in the cloud, you have that backup, and that's definitely true. And again, since this is not really about like film versus digital, I think it's great to have both. But having that actual negative to where you can always make reprints of it, not to mention that technology is like rapidly changing, right? And there are already a lot of like digital devices that are obsolete. You can't find those formats anymore. You can't read them. So unless you're really thinking ahead and converting your formats when you still can, and all of that, hard drives get corrupted. Lots of things happen. And I mean, not to say again that it's necessarily more archival to have a negative than to have it backed up 3 or 4 times in the cloud, but it is just another thing to have that physical archive of it, and I think it could be really important in the future. I mean, film has been around for about 100 years at least, so at least we know it'll kind of last that long, whereas digital, we're not really sure. We're not really sure what will change. I've also heard that the Library of Congress prefers film and negatives for that reason, for the archival aspect of it. Yeah, but again, like I said, you should have both. If you are shooting film, you can get them scanned at pixel&ink. So. Okay, so a little bit about quality. Again, I'm going to keep saying this over and over again, not to debate it, but and I don't even know what it's going to look like on this screen. But when it comes to dynamic range, film is really has really, really great dynamic range, especially detail in the highlights. I don't know if you can see it here as well as maybe on the computer, but if I had taken this picture with my digital camera, you would have had to do a lot of post-processing to bring out those highlights. And this is just a scan of the 35mm negative, and you can, if you can, see it from there, the cloud detail, and that's like an overcast sky, super light gray, and then the clouds are super white, but that differentiation would not have been possible with just a straight shot on digital. Again, there's great technology. Plenty of digital cameras can do that, especially in post-processing, but there is a lot of detail you can get in a film scan, or a film image, rather. that makes the dynamic range a reason why some people like to shoot it. Not to mention, I mean, this is 35 millimeter, so not to mention medium format and then large format. There are medium format digitals coming out, so digital is constantly, getting better as well. But yeah, right now the larger medium formats, maybe like 6x9, 6x7, 4x5, 8x10, those formats you really aren't getting the detail and quality in digital, because full frame digital is approximately, the sensor size is approximately a 35 millimeter negative slide, if I am thinking about that correctly. So again, the larger negatives are getting more detail, and that's really hard to find in a digital camera. So this is an image that I think people might look at it and think that it's digital because it seems very it's got good contrast, very sharp. But yeah, you can get that in film. It's not always soft focus. There's a lot of different qualities to film. Another thing that people like to, this image is a little washed out on here, but that people talk about a lot with film, like I mentioned before, is the cost, right? You're buying film. Film these days ranges from at least $5 to $15 a roll, and that's 36 exposures, usually on 35 millimeter, and even less on 120. You're getting 16 on 120. Not to mention 4x5 is, I don't know, $4 a sheet, something like that. It does seem incredibly pricey. Then you have to do the processing if you don't process it yourself. Well, there's been a lot of studies, and again, things change, and it's really based on your individual use. But there are a lot of studies that show that it might not be that much more expensive than digital, being that startup costs are usually a lot less. Some of the nicer ones are expensive still, sure, but as far as I shoot with my mom's, I have two of these, I just brought one, but with my mom's Olympus OM1 from the 70s, it was her high school graduation gift. I mean, it still works, all of these images that you're seeing are shot with this camera. Yeah, I don't know, I really highly doubt that in however 40, 50 years, the digital camera you're using today would work, or produce anything that is of good quality. Again, yeah, so I mean, this was free for me because it was my mom's, but these are not very expensive, maybe $100, something like that. I've got about 4 lenses, but still, I'm getting prime lenses, a 50 millimeter 1.4 for, I don't know, I think it was $80 or something like that. Whereas, in digital, those prime lenses can be in the thousands even. So there's that. Startup costs are a lot lower. And again, this is about full frame sensor, and so a full frame sensor digital camera is really, it's not cheap. Not to mention that the technology is changing so rapidly, and people are going to want to upgrade, right? Even if you spend, $1,500 on the Mark III, I mean, the Canon Mark IV just came out, right? And that's probably about the same price. I haven't price checked, but I'm guessing. Plus, so you're going to want to upgrade, and maybe, I don't know how long it was, maybe 5 years in between. And so those costs really do get compounded. If an all mechanical camera especially really holds up, really holds the test of time. And so I know personally that I've been using this camera specifically for maybe 5-6 years, something like that. And I haven't spent anywhere near the amount of money that I would have to just buy the initial cost of an equivalent quality. Cost is really, I mean, again, if you're invested already in digital, it's totally different, but when you're just talking about the actual cost side by side, film really isn't that much more expensive. Another thing that people like to talk about with film is the look. So, film just has that certain quality to it. I think this aspect is kind of also a little bit debatable because, like we saw in this image, I don't think that this image looks like film. I think that it looks like a digital. You'll see too, my prints and everything, if you know your film types and you shoot different types, they all look different, right? That look can be replicated. I mean, again, I'm not here to say that you can't get that on digital. It definitely can be replicated. There are plenty of presets that people like to use. But if that is something you're after, I mean, you might as well shoot the real thing. I mean, if you are using presets and trying to get that look or whatever, try using film and you actually might be pleased with the results. I know that my images, not only in the way I worked, which I'll talk more about that later, but just the actual end product was just so much better right out of the camera than most of my digital images that I would have to take and fiddle with and Photoshop and Lightroom and all of that to get that. It was already there, and I've chosen my favorite types of film that give me the looks that I want. And I mean, you guys are photographers, you know your lenses, you know the kind of aspects that they give you. Some are sharper, some are faster, things like that. So you can get the looks you want. But there is something that is like nostalgic when it comes to film, right? I mean, when it comes to that look. I mean, you see these kinds of pictures and they're obviously film, and that brings back like memories, even for someone like my age that, I mean, I didn't grow up on digital. I mean, digital it wasn't even a thing really when I started photography. So not to mention just going through your parents' old, photo albums and like things like that. Like it definitely has like a lot of memory attached to it, and I just love these like iconic film. Sad that you can't use Kodachrome anymore though, because of the chemistry. But yeah, and again, there's nothing wrong with any of these reasons. If these are the reasons why you're shooting film, that's great. Any reason to shoot film is great. All of these pictures are obviously from history, but there are plenty of photographers today that use film. Yeah, so fine art photographers like Alec Soth. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He's had several exhibits at the High. Famous for his work about the southern US. He shoots completely on film. You may or may not have heard of Ryan Muirhead, who's a fine art photographer shooting solely on film, medium format here, and Polaroid. Gregory Crewdson, who's really big fine art photographer. He's the head of the MFA program at Yale in photography. He shoots 8x10 and with very elaborate lighting. It's like a film set basically. But yeah, this is film. I'm sure you guys know Sally Mann, her very iconic photo. I was fortunate enough to hear her speak in Atlanta a couple years ago, and that was really amazing. She shoots 8x10 film and hand prints every print that she sells in her own darkroom. Ryan McGinley was one of the youngest people to have a solo exhibition at the Whitney, maybe 10 years ago. He got famous for these fine art images that he shot on 35mm about relationships and youth. And he's gone on to shoot fashion editorials for Vogue, like this one. And then recently, just this editorial, I don't know if you saw that in GQ, with Brad Pitt, all shot on film by Ryan McGinley. Yeah, other fashion photographers. Kathleen Naundorf, not super well known, but she studied under Horst P. Horst back in the day, and shoots 8x10 Polaroid, and her work is in Harper's Bazaar, and she's also done a lot of work for Chanel and Dior and designers like that. I'm really, really inspired by her Polaroids. I think they're really amazing. Emily Soto, she's a young photographer in New York who shoots for Teen Vogue, Vogue Taiwan, Elle, Nylon magazine. Here's these on the right here were shot with Fuji Instax wide and it's a beauty campaign. And then this is a Polaroid on the left. Juergen Teller, a photographer, got famous in the 80s, is still shooting today. Still doing modern portraiture and fashion photography, all on film. He uses a Leica with that, like his classic flash look. I think he was doing it before Terry Richardson, but don't quote me on that, but I think so. So yeah, other celebrity portrait photographers like Dan Winters. These are 4x5 color Portra 160 NC, which they don't make anymore. They've combined NC and VC, the neutral color and vibrant color, if you know about film stocks. And yeah, so that might have been expired film. It's got a really awesome look to it. Miles Aldridge, I don't know if anyone is a fan of Game of Thrones, but he just did a Game of Thrones editorial shot all on Kodak Ektachrome 100. So those colors are so vibrant. Danny Clinch, doing celebrity and music concert photography, photojournalism, lots of different, he dabbles in a lot of different mediums. Stephen Shore, really famous photographer. This is a photo he did when he was doing work at Andy Warhol's factory back in the 60s, and he's still shooting today. This is an Urban Outfitters editor or advertisement on medium format. And then of course, industries like the wedding industry. There's a lot of film photographers in the wedding industry. They love that look that I was talking about. Jose Villa is one of the big names in film wedding photography, and Elizabeth Messina, who is photographing Jessica Simpson's wedding, all on film. And even sports photography, which seems difficult to do on film. But David Burnett shot this is from the London Olympics in 2012. And this is shot on 4x5. These pictures are so amazing to me, like to think about shooting 4x5, like waiting for that moment. You have one shot. It's crazy, but it's really, really awesome. I have another one of his. I love it. I thought that I was like getting somewhere when I was trying to do photojournalism, manual focus, or concert photography, but this is a whole nother level. The cool thing about all these photographers using film is that the industry is noticing. There's a lot happening, especially now. I'm really excited about actually the timing of this presentation because a lot of things are just being talked about. First thing that came out just a few months ago was that Kodak is bringing back Ektachrome. This film was discontinued in 2012, one of their most popular slide films, and they decided to start production again early next year. So Ilford has seen a 5% annual compounded growth rate recently, so that's exciting. And then this, just last week I think it was, so Edward Land, the co-founder of Polaroid, said, "Don't ever undertake a project unless it's manifestly important and nearly impossible." So 9 years ago when Polaroid went bankrupt, the Impossible Project was started. They bought the formulas to make the film again with the idea that they wanted to keep Polaroid film alive. That was their mission. The project that they undertook that was nearly impossible. But now it's actually come true. They have merged with Polaroid. If I understand it correctly, one of the owners of the Impossible Project acquired a large stake in Polaroid, and now they have all gone under one roof and started this new brand with the Polaroid name called Polaroid Originals. So yeah, it's super exciting because this was their whole goal for 9 years. They've worked and they've tweaked chemistries here and there, and I have some Polaroid film here and more on the table. And I mean, it was wonky at first, and they went through a lot of trials. I have some that are completely faded because they just didn't last. But now that they have like full control with the actual Polaroid name, they've released a new film. Ryan was just telling me that it's that he's seen examples of it compared to their old film that's a lot sharper, more contrast, develops a lot quicker. Some of the Impossible Project was taking like 30, 40 minutes. Now it develops just within a few minutes. So it's super exciting. I mean, this was their goal, and to see this kind of like, this such an iconic brand like come back is really exciting. And I think it really is gonna take, you know, film is not going to be obsolete. It's gonna take it like into the next generation. Oh yeah, and they also came out with the One Step 2 camera. Back 40 years ago, they created the One Step. Polaroid came out with the One Step camera, all, you know, automatic, easy to use, affordable, like for the masses to take instant photography. And now it's kind of cool that Polaroid Originals is creating this new One Step camera, very affordable, easy to use for everyone to be able to have access to this iconic medium. When they announced the Polaroid Originals brand, it was on like the 80th anniversary of the Polaroid name. So pretty exciting. Fujifilm is also in the game with instant photography. Film photographers don't always love Fuji because they keep discontinuing film and they're not really listening to photographers as much today. They really, I've heard, whatever sells in Japan where they're located, that's really what they're focusing on, the Japanese market, not so much the US market. So things are definitely different over there. But their instant film is really a big hit. And so they've recently come out with this square format to kind of compete with the Polaroid. Before they just had these mini credit card type size film pictures, and then this wide format, which is a little bit smaller than the Polaroid Spectra. I have a Polaroid Spectra camera over there. That was the wide film. So, but it's still cool to see them in the game and doing some fun stuff, along with Lomography, which is a company that makes a lot of cool experimental films, and just they sell a lot of the like kind of toy cameras and like the plastic medium formats and things like that. But it's just a really fun company for film, and they're starting a Kickstarter for a new camera that will use the Fujifilm Square and the Fujifilm Mini. So both formats in one camera, and it'll also be all analog. I forgot to mention, Fuji's is actually like a hybrid camera. It takes a digital image and then kind of projects that onto the film instead of just reading the light that comes in. So Lomography's is actually the only fully analog that will take Fuji films. So anyway, that's kind of interesting. And then there's new companies popping up here and there, small like boutique companies that are kind of getting in on the film game. This company is pretty cool. It's called Intrepid. They create affordable 4x5 and 8x10 cameras that are really lightweight out of this, I don't know exactly what type of wood this is, but it's very lightweight wood, plywood. But it makes large format photography accessible and affordable for people who want to try it out. So then you can attach whatever lens you have for it and take it on the field with you. So that's pretty exciting. Not to mention moving pictures. Another great thing that Kodak did not too long ago was come out with a new Super 8 camera. I actually don't know if it's quite released to the public yet, but they're making a new Super 8 format. That is 34 years after they stopped making Super 8 cameras. They decided to create a new one. And I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with that format and have maybe like old home videos on it. I know I've seen some from my mom's when she was younger. And it's a really cool format. And now, yeah, I mean, they stopped producing it 34 years ago, and now that it's coming back. So that's so cool. I really want to get into videos and stuff with Super 8. Movies. Movies shot on film, still very, very happening these days. Several directors will only shoot on film completely. And so Kodak has actually opened up new labs for developing motion picture film in London and New York. They recently did, and then in Atlanta, they acquired one. So a lot of movies and TV shows are being filmed in Atlanta, and like The Walking Dead, and The Walking Dead is shot on film. So there's labs to develop motion picture film that are popping up now. So recent movies like Hidden Figures, Django Unchained, and all of Tarantino's films, he said that he might retire because you can't project 35 millimeter in most cinemas in America anymore. So he's totally committed to the medium. The Revenant, I think it's interesting too, this movie was shot only with natural light too, which seems really impressive and difficult, but not just period dramas, movies like Inception, futuristic movies, Star Wars. I'm not a film buff, by the way, so. But I find these to be really interesting, especially that they're shot on film. La La Land, that was a great movie, and then Baby Driver shot in Atlanta that just came out. So all of these shot on Kodak 35 millimeter motion picture film. I mean, not everyone is shooting film. Directors like James Cameron, who did Avatar, or Michael Bay, who does Transformer movies, or movies like that. Those guys are really into digital, and that's okay too. Like that fits their ideas, and that works for them. It's kind of all about whatever medium really works for you. But plenty of filmmakers these days really shoot film only and won't shoot digital. So now I'm just gonna kind of transition into talking more about my personal journey. But does anyone have any questions so far? Or feel free to stop me also. This doesn't have to be like super formal. Hey.
You showed the Ektachrome that's coming back. Who's going to do the processing?
Who's going to do the processing? Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, most film photographers that I know and that I've done research on don't do their own processing, especially color. So, there are a lot of developing labs, not a ton, but there are several across the country. We use one in Atlanta that still has the chemistry for all those formats. So I'm not really sure. But these labs that Kodak are opening up, they're not just for motion picture films. They'll do developing for still photography as well, along with a lot of labs, like I said. The one in Atlanta we use, there's ones, several in California, New York. I would venture to guess that with slide film, probably most people are sending them to professional labs.
Do you print directly from your negatives, or do you scan them?
So I do both. More so when I had access to a darkroom, I would do prints that way with black and white. I will say that I haven't personally done C prints before from my negatives. So that is one thing that I kind of missed out. When I was going through school, we were like a weird transition class that they were kind of trying to do more digital for color photography. And anyways, we were like the one class that kind of skipped the C prints class that wasn't like a requirement. So that's kind of sad and unfortunate. I hear it's kind of a pain though to do C prints especially. So, but I have done darkroom, black and white in the darkroom, and those prints there on the left side are all prints there. But most of the time, I print, scan and print. Yeah.
Does scanning it still maintain the increased dynamic range, or do you lose it when you convert it to digital?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. A lot depends on the scan, the type of scanner you're using and if it can actually maintain that dynamic range. I think that you still maintain at least some of it, but I don't think it's as much as you would have gotten if you were doing it in the darkroom, unfortunately. So.
What are your two favorite films? One in black and white and one
Sure, yeah, and that actually is a really good transition into my personal presentation about it. So my favorite color film is Portra 160. This is a Portra 160 film photograph I shot. Again, I shoot mostly 35 millimeter. I've done 4x5. There's one example on the table in the plastic of the girl with the goose in front of her. That's a 4x5 image, printed digitally though. So I've tried to include every type of film I've ever shot in these prints and in my slides. So anyone interested about film type, I can mention that as I go. Hey.
And Jordana, would those happen to be available for sale at your employer?
Yes, we are about to place a huge order for lots of different types of films, 13 different varieties in 35 millimeter and 120. So yes, they will be very soon, within the next couple of weeks. This is again Portra 160. So yeah, when I was younger, like I said, I started on film. I shot my first wedding on film when I was 15. I was really young, and when digital really became a thing, and I was one of those like, oh, it's so fake. Like, I mean, I didn't know what I was talking about, but I was like, I'm never going digital, blah, blah, blah. And of course I did, especially when I started shooting weddings more professionally, because it just seemed like the smart thing to do, right? I mean, you're taking thousands of images, you know, and that was also when I was younger and not as confident with my skills, you know, so having that backup was nice, or that LCD screen to like check yourself. But there's a lot of reasons why I decided to go back to film. This is T-Max 400, which I actually probably would say that is my favorite, the 400 especially, my favorite black and white. Oh yeah, it definitely does, for sure. I like the tones better in 400, but the grain, I mean, yeah, I have a T-Max 100. If you're interested, I'll show you. So yeah, so again, like I was talking earlier about cost, when I was in school, you know, broke college student especially, like my digital was crop sensor, and I just wasn't getting like the work that I wanted. And so I dug my mom's old camera out and started shooting. And like I was saying, the results, just the aesthetic results were so much closer to what I was envisioning in my head beforehand. But there's a lot of other, again, Portra 160. There's a lot of other things that I found when I started shooting film again that made me kind of like really stick with it. And one of them was that I really slowed down. And again, that can be a disadvantage for some. But when you're starting in photography and you're just like learning, really thinking about your image intentionally before you take the shot just creates better images. I mean, most people would say that, even if you're a great photographer, firing away and then checking your LCD screen is not going to give you the best results as if you're in the moment, thinking about what you're doing as you're doing it. I was also able to kind of let go of some of the control. I mean, I don't know if you guys are this way, but as an artist, as a photographer, I could get really anal, just like thinking about all the different things that I could do. There's almost too many options, too many things that you can do. And when it came down to it, I wanted to create a good image, properly exposed, in focus, or whatever, and I needed to kind of trust myself. And it may seem counterintuitive, but when I stopped and didn't have the LCD screen or the histogram to fall back on, I trusted myself more. I became less nervous during a shoot because I was like, you've been doing this since you were a teenager. Calm down, you've got this. You know how to make a properly exposed image. You know shutter speed, aperture, ISO. You know these things. You don't have to check yourself. You know what I mean? And I don't know if that's just me, but the way that I was able to really kind of chill out and just take a lot better images. This is a Fuji 400H image. Also just being able to connect with my subjects. I mean, in my fine art work, a lot of my concepts are about relationships and my personal relationships, actual things that I've gone through, memories, things like that. But I don't do self-portraiture. That's just never the way that I've really wanted to express myself. So being able to really like stay like in the moment and connect with your model, especially if you're trying to get them to give you, you know, a certain emotion, which any portrait photographer really is trying to do that, no matter what your end purpose is, if it's fine art or portraiture or anything, fashion, anything. You want something, you're trying to get something from your subject. And I noticed that when I was shooting film, not distracted, really in the moment, really engaged with my subject. I also really liked the element of surprise, which I push even further in my work by using experimental films. Like this is by a brand called Revolog. This is their color with a K. They do experimental hand-fogged films where this one gives these like rainbow effects. They have others that give like bright white spots and just random things that I would kind of like to try to, again, kind of let go of that control, like have something else be in charge of kind of like part of the end product. And I realized that that actually brought a lot of like visual interest than me having to like come up with, you know, what do I want this to be? There's so many options, right? Especially because I do scan and do manipulations digitally afterwards. So there's just so many options, and I just like the aspect of letting the chemistry kind of take control. Not to mention the act of like sending it off and that waiting period actually proved to be really good for me in the way that I viewed my own work. You kind of have like a second pair of eyes looking at it when they come back. Feels like Christmas for one when you get scans back. Super exciting. But it's also, you know, you just have time to like think about what you're doing and not just like shoot, plug the memory card in and just, you know, start editing where you're almost like too close to it, and giving that breathing room and coming back to it has really also helped my work in the end product. This is Ilford HP5. Yeah, so I think that, you know, whether you started on film like I did or you're just interested in trying it, you know, I think that it can always help your photography. I think that that for those reasons I mentioned about just like slowing down and really being intentional, I think that anyone who wants to try film, whether you go back to digital or not, that it's really will only improve your photography. And I mean, the basics are really the same, you know? Again, you're photographers, you know aperture, you know shutter speed, you know ISO, you know these things. It's the same, you know, it's not a completely, it's photography. It's all there. So yeah, I think that I could really help the way you think about your work and give some interesting like new results that you might not have thought that you could achieve. So yeah, I'm happy to talk more about any kind of technical aspects if you guys want, or anything else you want me to talk about. Sorry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. Who is making a slide film these days? Anybody?
Fujifilm still makes Provia and Velvia. Honestly, those are the only ones I know of. I don't shoot a ton of slide film, and I mean that might be why there aren't that many choices. I've shot some expired Ektachrome before, but not too much. Not too many people.
I wore today Kodak. That was my favorite film.
Kodachrome. We just found a ton of it at the shop, and I am so sad that it's like, I mean, some of it expired the year I was born. So, I mean, you can't get chemistry for it, but even if you could, I mean, to shoot that and get, yeah, it would be interesting.
We'll bring up an image in black and white developer.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. You can develop it black and white. You can develop Kodachrome as black and white.
That's true.
Yeah, so it will come up there. So, hey.
I read that a lot of people overexpose film.
Sure, yeah, definitely. So back when I was talking about like dynamic range, film has like a lot of latitude in the highlights specifically. It's opposite for digital, right? Usually you want to underexpose a little bit when you shoot digital because you want to not blow out your highlights. That's a real problem with digital. With film, it's the opposite. You overexpose it slightly to make sure you are getting enough detail in the shadow area, because the latitude in the highlights will hold up with several stops of overexposure. Most color negative film can be overexposed at least 5 stops with minimal like difference in the highlight areas. You're not going to see it truly like blown out. Yeah, slide film in general, much lower latitude for sure. But when I develop, when I overexpose, I actually develop it at box speed. And that is giving me the extra detail in the shadows, and I'm still not losing those highlight areas. So at box speed, so so like I said, I shoot portrait at 160, but portrait 160 I don't normally overexpose. Portrait 800 does better when you overexpose. So if I shoot 800 at 400 ISO, I'll develop it at 800 though. So it's essentially almost like you're pushing it a stop. Not quite equal, but you're getting that extra stop of light. And every film is slightly different, but Portrait 800 I find to give me the best results when I'm doing that, as well as, well, here's Portrait 800 here on the right. As well as Cinestill Film, which is a company that takes motion picture film and coats it so that it can be shot in regular film cameras. So their film I find to also work better when it's overexposed a little bit. I have some examples of that somewhere. So this is another experimental film, Adox Color Implosion. Very high grain for low ISO, which again might seem silly, but it's fun, interesting to try. Again, Portrait 160. Here's Cinestill 800. It's a tungsten balance film, which is pretty cool because there's not too many tungsten balance films on the market available either. So I like to overexpose this film. This is also Cinestill. Does anyone else have any other questions?
What does it cost now for developing roll film?
So the lab we use in Atlanta is $7.99 a roll for just developing, and $10.99 a roll for developing and scanning at standard size scans, which usually can be printed up to maybe about 16 by 20. And so not super high res scans, but yeah, so that's, and they're on the lower end. A lot of labs I've seen, can be like $17, $25 a roll.
36 exposures?
Yeah. And a lot of them actually charge the same for 36 or 24 exposures, which seems kind of silly, but I guess the developing part, is pretty similar, but the scanning part, so it does seem pricey, but again, not compared to how much you've spent on all your digital equipment.
If they go back to film, are they going to go back to ASA versus ISO?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Hey.
But what scan do you work with in your business? Do you do your scanning in your own business, or pixel&ink, which is?
Yeah, I don't do the scanning ourselves. Carolyn actually is the one who does a lot of the scanning at Pixel&ink.
Pixel&ink, we use an Epson 11,000 XL, so and we have trays for, it's large, and we have trays for pretty much everything, 4x5, 8x10.
I didn't even really talk about this. Is one thing that Fuji discontinued their peel apart film for Polaroid land cameras, but I have one example of that. So if there's no more questions, thanks.